Yes, I know. Hi there and welcome to today's webinar, Effective Remote Board Meetings. I'm Raphael from Better Boards and we're excited to have you here with us today. Hopefully you can hear me, see me, let us know in the chat and then I'll be able to know that you can. Also, you'll notice there's a chat on the side so you can put things in there, but if you actually have questions, my colleague Sheena will be managing the chat. If you've got any sort of challenges while running the webinar runs, but if you actually have questions, I'll be taking questions towards the end in the questions tab. And also before we sort of kick off, under the polls tab, we've already got a poll running there. At what stage is your board at with remote board meetings? While we sort of get started and kicked off, head over there and submit your vote for that, and then we get a bit of an idea of who is sort of on the webinar in terms of what stage you're at with your remote meetings. So while you're taking the poll and that's sort of going, so there's our poll, but I do take it in the poll tab. While the poll's running, I just mentioned our supporter today is today's webinar is free for everybody. Thanks to our cat herder, rest easy knowing your board administration is all sorted. They have a 45-day free trial. You can get started and test it out at www.ourcatherder.com. So after we finish today, certainly check that out, have a bit of a look. What will we cover today? So this is really sort of a bit of a high-level overview of what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about why remote, the opportunity that remote meetings present, legal issues, meeting prep, chairing the meeting, meeting etiquette, increasing communications, meeting technology, tips, tricks, and other considerations, and a bit on security and privacy considerations. So we're going to cover a fair bit. Hopefully you'll all take away something. You all take away something new, whether you've done a meeting before or not. It looks like the majority of people have already, that I can see on the poll, have already run one or more remote meeting already, and a few people, about 20% who've responded, are thinking about the transition, and one person does not want to run meetings remotely. Hopefully that 1% will change your mind before the end, but certainly that particular 1% who do not want to, it'd be lovely to hear in the chat perhaps why you don't want to run them. So the really big thing with our board meetings at the moment, as everybody will be well and truly aware, in times of crisis and change and social upheaval like we have now today all around the globe, our board meetings must go on. So primarily the reason is to ensure that directors can continue to engage in strategic discussion and decision making to ensure the organisation stays viable and they can chart the path to what McKinsey calls the next normal. And I think that's a really critical one, is in terms of framing how you think about doing, whether it's meetings or other things, is charting that path as a board to the next normal, because the next normal will come, the crisis will, whether it's in 10 weeks or 12 months or 2 years, the crisis that we have at the moment will pass, but and we need to get our organisations there. So that means we have to keep our board meetings running. In fact, meetings may need to increase in frequency as we're working through such a highly dynamic and unprecedented disruption and dislocation for so many organisations and individuals. So I'll cover quickly why run meetings remotely. I mean, I think it's probably fairly obvious now with gathering restrictions and curve flattening and social distancing and all that, why we might want to do this. But before the current crisis, there was a lot of reasons to actually run them remotely, which I thought was worth covering off and thinking about if you haven't thought about them already. It has the potential to increase your board member recruitment or director recruitment options because you can draw from a wider pool of candidates if they can attend your meetings remotely. Increase convenience for attending meetings, reduce travel and associated costs, increase meeting cadence. We can run more meetings if we need to. And I think as well, remote meetings present a massive opportunity to improve meeting processes. There are certainly some potential negative consequences to running meetings remotely, and these can be reduced effectiveness of the board as a whole, and it can increase board dynamics issues. But I think if you prepare extensively and carefully, there are a lot of benefits to remote meetings. And many of them were there prior to the COVID-19 coronavirus situation. But now it's sort of more pressing for a lot of organizations, I suppose. So probably a lot of you clearly are thinking about running remote meetings, a lot of it driven by the current challenges that we face. But I think as well, if we use remote meetings extensively, we really get on top of them, it will actually have the potential to significantly improve our face-to-face board meetings in the future when the current crisis passes. So I do think it's an opportunity to improve. And so I would put to you to consider what could be better about your meetings. Could you get rid of some old or bad meeting habits that you've had in the past? Think about your past board meetings. What needed improvement? What could be better? Use this opportunity in a shift to remote or more heavily remote meetings to really make improvements to your meeting process and practices for the board. Quick comment on board and director focus in a time of crisis. Don't want to spend too long on this, but I think from our discussions with boards and executives, consultants, suppliers in the industry, one of the things we're seeing, of course, is the initial reaction for everybody is in times of crisis, it's easy to fixate on the current issue, which of course is COVID-19. But we do need to remember that the trains still need to run on time for a lot of organizations, and other balls need to stay in the air. So whether that's strategic planning, board recruitment, all the everyday issues we deal with as boards, so that when the crisis is over, the organization hasn't dropped the ball on everything. So the comment being, don't allow your board agendas to be completely consumed by COVID-19 items, even though it is, yes, a critically important topic. We're busy trying to figure out how do we keep our organizations afloat and navigating through this crisis, but we need to remember to keep everything else running as well. So just a quick comment on that. So before we really get into the rest of the meeting, today's webinars, two really critical questions that you need to ask yourself, particularly if you are considering the transition to remote meetings. And I would say a couple of things here before I get into this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play well on the internet. And I would like to thank our good friends at Wentworth Lawyers for their assistance in a bit of legal checking on the ins and outs of remote meetings, specifically in Australian jurisdictions. So we do need to consider these two critical questions before we bother. Otherwise, with remote meetings, primarily, and it doesn't matter if we're doing them on phone or video or whatever, maybe chat, whatever method we might use, we need to check our constitution's governing documents to make sure there's no restrictions. Now, if your organization has updated its constitution in the last decade, it's probably likely that it allows for remote meetings. However, there could be issues hidden in older constitutions that have not been updated, so it's best to double check. If there are provisions you think could cause an issue, then speak to a lawyer about a constitution update. Friends at Wentworth Lawyers, I'm sure, would be happy to help. And so the sort of following I've got to mention on this is subject to your organization's constitution. So again, please double check it. Always good to dust it off and make sure it's not just gathering dust in the drawer. For companies limited by guarantee in Australia, the Corporations Act Section 248D allows for director meetings to be held using technology, provided that each director has given consent. This would be commonly captured as a written consent. The consent can be a standing one, so you don't need to get a new one for each meeting. And a director may only withdraw their consent within a reasonable period of time before the meeting. I'm not sure what that they would classify that as exactly, but I would be guessing that probably, it's maybe the day before, not like 2 minutes before the meeting, which would cause no end of issues. It's also worth noting the AC&C model rules provided by the AC&C for charities that use the company limited by guarantee structure actually specifically provides for remote directors meetings. So if you're using the model rules from the AC&C, you've probably got something covering it explicitly. Incorporated associations, the acts in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia, and Australian Capital Territory to permit directors' meetings to be held remotely. Acts in South Australia, Northern Territory, and Tasmania state a meeting must be held strictly in accordance with the Constitution. So it's 100% on the Constitution in those states, South Australia, Northern Territory, and Tasmania. But equally, the acts in Victoria will also still refer to the Constitution, I'm sure. If you're not in Australia, if you're in New Zealand or the US or wherever you might be, please check the rules in your specific jurisdiction and seek legal advice to be 110% sure. But it's likely to be very similar in that a lot of it will rely on the constitution of the organisation, I would expect. More generally, irrespective of your legal structure, the most important thing, and again, this would probably apply in most jurisdictions around the globe, is that the requirements of the Constitution are satisfied. So pay particular attention to director consent for technology in use, and it may need to be specific around the actual technology you choose. That you've still done timely and adequate notice of meeting. Electing chairperson is, if there's not one already, has been done. You're hitting your quorum requirements. You've got adequate technology in use, including prior testing of it. You're doing your minute taking correctly. All appropriate docs for discussion are provided to all directors prior to the meeting with more than adequate time for review, and you're still meeting your record keeping requirements. They are the same as in-person meetings, basically. A quick mention on circular resolutions here as well. Check to ensure that your constitution does allow for circular resolutions and motions to be passed without board members or directors meeting in person. Check the specific requirements in place for a resolution to pass. Do all directors have to agree, or does it only require a sufficient number to obtain a quorum? Another quick comment on this, on passing resolutions remotely. I read an article yesterday by a well-known Queensland law firm recommending the use of email for passing circular resolutions. It is my opinion, and that of many security professionals, just in terms of sensitive data rather than specifically resolutions, but is that this is a bad idea, primarily because it has the potential to promote poor record-keeping practices because more than one person gets the email, so we're a bit lax on it. But additionally, email is one of the least secure forms of communication available online. There's been a bit of kerfuffle about Zoom meetings recently, but think of your email like a postcard. Anyone can read its contents as it travels across the internet to its destination. But then imagine that each intermediary or person who processes that card, which could be many people outside your control, if it's a postcard, imagine they were photocopying it more than once every time they picked it up before you get it. So in 99% of cases, even iMessage on iOS is more secure than your email if we want to be security conscious. Not going to go too deep on that right now. There's a bit more on security later, but something to consider. Annual general meetings as well. These are more likely than board meetings to pose a challenge using remote technologies, particularly if you have a large member base. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of time to conduct in-depth research on these because the legislation is a little bit more unclear. But again, the Constitution is very important for consideration of annual general meetings. Quick recap of remote meeting issues. Basically, you've got your regular meeting issues plus a bunch more or exacerbated regular issues. So we could have tech problems, late attendees not sending the agenda far enough in advance, chair not chairing the meeting well, lack of follow-up after the meeting, not capturing actions, attendees not reading the agenda in advance, security issues, attendees multitasking, agenda is not clear and concise, no post-meeting follow-up. Sorry, that's repeated. Poor location choice by participants, no in-meeting water cooler time to sort of compress, talk, shoot back and forth a little bit on things that you might normally have after a meeting. Trust and confidentiality and respect, and notice of meeting too short. So there's all sorts of issues. The only way around them really is to be well prepared and organised plenty in advance, and really also just be prepared that there's probably going to be issues no matter how well prepared you are. Something on trust, confidentiality and respect. I would put to you that running remote meetings requires higher levels of trust and confidentiality than in-person physical meetings. It also requires a high level of respect. I mean, that's true in normal meetings too, but just because it's virtual doesn't mean you can mute the meeting, respond to emails, leave the room, etc. It's worth giving consideration to the following: where will everyone be located during the meeting, which has a whole wide range of implications. That could be who might hear things they should not, who's not supposed to be on the meeting, ambient noise, of course, whether that's children, dogs, household sounds, music. Of course, in digital, people can record the meeting without approval when they should not be doing so, or it's easier to do that. So make sure your policies are clear on no recording. It basically would be the same as if somebody snuck a phone or tape recorder into a normal meeting, but it is still something to be cognizant of because it can be done much more surreptitiously. Additionally, something as well for probably not small organizations, or it may apply to, but particularly bigger ones where you may have people joining into the meetings who have never been privy to board meetings before, such as an IT person to assist in setup and maybe just monitoring the meeting and challenges people have. If you bring those people into your meetings, not only do they need to be trusted implicitly, but they need to be well briefed on and bound by confidentiality. So if you're going to bring in those third parties, you need to think about that as well. And I think it's always a good practice to remind everyone about confidentiality at the start of the meeting. Preparation pre-meeting. Prepare. Set meeting times. If using video, you'll need to give consideration to the ebb and flow of bandwidth availability. There's, according to Cloudflare, who's a large backbone provider for a lot of websites, they've seen a 20 to 40% increase in daily internet traffic across the globe, particularly significant increases when leaders are making announcements. Plus, we are seeing in the news more people are using video for communication, so that's taxing internet connectivity across the globe. Video conferencing, video streaming, accessing cloud-based office applications are among the activities that have been seeing a huge increase and a huge data demand increase. And so that's been impacting actually in the very first stages of the lockdowns or restrictions. We did see, even in our office here, we'd be making phone calls which weren't connecting because the network capacity wasn't yet ramped up to it. Luckily, that's changing. Telstra and others in Australia, I'm sure around the globe, are ramping up capacity. Another interesting stat is prior to COVID-19, an NBN network processed about 5 terabits per second from 8 to 5 p.m. On the 27th of March, the stats for that were peak demand at 9.2. So from 5 to 9.2 is a fairly decent increase, almost double. We also see between 8 and 10 p.m. general increases of around 15% to 12.4 terabits per second across the NBN network here in Australia. So I think in terms, that gives you some idea of maybe we need to think about where our meeting times are if we're using digital technologies. You know, Netflix times, maybe avoid those when people are commonly sitting down to watch a bit of Netflix. Purely because of the bandwidth. Maybe also don't want your board members getting distracted thinking, oh, this meeting's getting boring, I'll get on some Netflix. But also there's been changes to people's routines where we've got others in a house or a space because so many people are home. The other, something else to give consideration to pre-meeting is if you've got staff preparing documents for the board, whether it's an assistant or the CEO, if they've recently moved to remote working, they're going to need more time than they might ordinarily to do that, primarily because they may still be scrambling to figure out how to go remote themselves in terms of managing their workloads and everything else. So I think we need to not cut slack, but give a bit of leeway to people and give them extra time to make sure they're prepped and ready. So basically, more preparation is done in advance, the smoother things will go, is the gist of it. So increase in preparation communications. So really, more time, as I sort of extending from my previous point, more time needs to be allowed for meeting and board pack preparation. For virtual meetings, there is going to be an increasing amount of meeting prep and communications. We need to ensure that directors and board members have got their consents in place if we don't already have them for using technology for the meeting. We need to have dial-in or login codes that need to be sent. We need instructions for how to use the technology that may need to be prepared. You'll need to send reminders to test software to ensure it works as expected on all board members' systems if we're using particularly video. And I suppose it's worth noting, as I'm going through this, while we can use conference calling for communicating, then the preference tends to be, I think, for a lot of organizations where possible to go video. And so this presentation is not exclusively referencing only video, but a lot of the comments I'll make are around that, particularly with bandwidth, etc. But because video is just a better medium for getting closer to that face-to-face than just audio alone, although it may not be possible to use video in some situations. If we've got members making presentations or preparing reports for submission, we'll need to submit well in advance. And If we're across time zones, then we need to choose times that are optimal for as we can get for all attendees. We need to have be sending reminders for people to show up, and also remember to provide a contact detailed list of the rest of the board, or a point of contact to call or get in touch with if someone's having trouble connecting, because no matter how many times we test, you know, you might be that that person can't connect. I've done sessions as well where we did a test, and then a week before or a day before, and then on the day that person can't get on. Who knows? Like, their system is the same, everything appears to be the same, for some reason they can't. So technology, they have that both on video calls but also on conferencing calls, and so technology is wonderful, but things can go wrong, so be prepared for that. And that brings us to testing and experimentation. Again, run a test meeting, like a full meeting before the official one. That will also allow you to experiment, or maybe a mock meeting. It's going to take time, but I think it's worthwhile doing if you've got new people who are transitioning into using it more heavily, or not comfortable with technology. You can experiment a bit to find which formats work best for you. Yeah, test the technology, test it again. You just want your actual first official meeting to go smoothly, so we want to make sure that we've given the time over to testing. Yes, it requires more time and energy from everybody, staff, board members, people who are attending to minute take, whatever it might be. But we need to make sure that if we're going to go down the technology route, then everybody's comfortable and on board with it. Protocols and etiquette and distractions in meetings, digital meetings. Broadly, your normal meeting protocols are going to apply, but I would suggest making a list for directors to refer to and highlight changes or expectations. We want to reiterate in our remote meetings that civility and respect must be the norm. They should be sticking to those two core principles: be respectful of others' time, be present. At a minimum, make sure your directors have all reread over your standard meeting protocols. A couple of other tips is, if you're in a meeting, we've all been in that meeting where it's a Skyping or something, talking over the top of each other. Oh, you start, no, you go, oh, and then we sort of get stuck in that cycle, especially if we're experiencing a delay in the stream or the audio. And so we shouldn't be too differential or apologetic when we speak with over each other. One person sort of take the lead, or the chair of the meeting should just state who should proceed, and checking in with others. Then after we've done sort of making our point, check in with the others and get their thoughts. Providing instructions for any actions board members need to take in the meeting, using the tools of the platform you're using, muting, unmuting, audio, raising hands, depends on what you're using. Try and treat it all like face-to-face, give you full attention, do not multitask. Make sure your board members know that. It's so easy to have multiple applications open if you're using video one, or even on a conference call, you can have your laptop there and your phone on the other side. It's too easy, so be very specific about that. I think it's really important. It may be seen like babying people, but I think people forget because they just think, oh no, that's fine, I'll just do it, no one will notice, I'll be fine, I can multitask. But the fact is, we're poor at it as human beings. I mean, maybe there's some superhumans amongst us who aren't, but generally best to be focused, particularly in board meetings, on the meeting only and nothing else. So that means turning off instant messaging, email, notifications. Make sure you minimize background noises. Encourage people to consider their background. Let others in space know that you're going to be attending a remote meeting, so that noise levels can be managed. If you don't want people just wandering past video. We had there was a great YouTube clip the other day of a reporter who was remote working, and her father walked in to a live stream without his top on. So, you know, things happen, and we of course have to just deal with that. But if you let people in your household know what you're doing, then if you're at home, then attending the meeting, then you're not going to have those embarrassing moments. Be on time for the meeting, and an interesting comment that I noticed in a news article the other day, and I can't remember who it's attributed to, but the moment your eyes are distracted, the quality of the connection is compromised on if you're using video. But when people feel seen, then the quality of the communication is enhanced. So agendas. Review your current agendas with remote in mind. Clear, concise, and well-structured agendas are now more important than ever before. The chair, the company secretary, the CEO may need to specifically review agendas or your current existing agendas to determine what changes need to be made for remote meetings. Clarity on what is being asked of directors is extremely important, so make sure your agendas or your reports, everything are very crystal clear as they can be. A heavier focus on pre-meeting preparation is more important than ever, as I've already said, but I say it again, I think it's really critical. Both by those doing the preparation of documents and also the directors who need to pre-read them, etc. I mean, it's not acceptable even in our regular meetings not to pre-read, but it's equally more important in remote board meetings because we just don't have as much time in a lot of respects. You have a set start time as normal, but also have a strict end time and stick to those. Shorten up what is on your agenda as much as you can. It may be that you need to consider running more shorter and more focused meetings more regularly, but allow extra time for items because of the meeting can be slowed down by technology. So shorter meeting, less items, but more time for those. So you get more time for those critical items. A trend we have actually seen amongst boards that already run all remote meetings, and these are some, this is from discussions with people who run some very large not-for-profits and also some very large public companies that use remote meetings, is they have shifted to board meetings that are an hour long to 1.5 hours maximum, and they just run more meetings that are more regular cadence, they're shorter. It's more effective for remote meetings just because that attention just gets so easy to get distracted and for your attention to wane. So as I said, cut down the agenda so it's really only focused on one or two major core topics and core agenda items, and really try and strip out any excess and fluff that, while it would be nice to cover, is it critical? Maybe not. It's hard to tell, of course, as you will know your agendas and your organization's needs better than anyone, but really think very hard about it. Push more critical items to the front where the energy of the meeting, where the energy and concentration are highest. A good practice for all meetings, but I think very, very critical in digital remote space. If you're not already doing so, make sure you have specifically allocated a set amount of time per item in the agenda, and also a responsible person who will speak to each agenda item. Consider the item spacing and cadence of the meeting. Some boards like to mix up the agenda items between longer ones and shorter ones to keep the meeting a bit more interesting. In remote meetings, it is harder to maintain engagement than in-person meetings, as many of you will be aware. Allow time in the meeting for agenda for a bit of social chit chat at the beginning, solicit feedback on what needs to be included in the agenda before the meeting, and while you might have a core group and CEO, company secretary, etc., chair, crafting it, it's probably worthwhile making sure that you include, particularly if you've never run remote meetings before for boards, it's probably worthwhile, even if it was staff meetings, whatever it might be, it doesn't really matter what sort of meeting, whoever's going to be involved, if you haven't done it before, it's probably worth including everyone and getting everyone's opinions. They may have better ideas that you hadn't thought of, but equally, then they feel included in the process because it will be a journey to move towards remote meetings if you've never done them before. One question to ask would be, are there topics on your agenda that can be covered in a separate subcommittee meeting? Always that sort of plays again to that shorter meetings more often. Assign 10 minutes at the end of the meeting to do that water cooler talk, have everyone say what they would have done differently in the meeting, maybe a bit of a speak now, forever hold your peace around it to a certain extent, not so it doesn't drag on, but just to get sort of a feel for how people felt. Like, you want to be checking in regularly anyway, and I'll cover this a bit more in the chairing piece of this presentation, but it's definitely something to sort of think about, is how do we encourage some social dynamics or provide places for where, I mean, there's some board meetings where board members rush straight off afterwards, but there's plenty as well where it's, you know, hang around, we all sort of chit chat and have a bit of, download. So how do you give space for that as well, for some of those more normalized things to happen? I love this quote, the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. And this is really about ensuring everybody who needs to be in a meeting, whether it's on a conference call or a video meeting, whatever it might be, need to ensure that everyone can participate. That comes down to two things. One is technology access and availability, and the other is digital literacy. You need to ensure they can all participate. Sorting out technology access, I mean, broadly speaking, it's relatively straightforward. We choose that technology, we buy, borrow, maybe not steal, but that's how the saying goes, beg, borrow, steal. The technology or provide access to it, and kind of, there's some upskilling potentially that has to happen there, they're kind of done. But from a digital literacy point of view, that's where that, we get the technology, but then we need to make sure everybody's at the same skill level to be able to use it effectively, be comfortable with it. Because if we're not comfortable with something, that's going to create another barrier to being able to engage properly in the meeting. And so you need to ensure that your board members and directors are at a minimum level of digital literacy to be able to join a meeting and participate actively and feel very comfortable doing so. If they don't feel comfortable, it's just not going to work. So you may need to invest time, maybe some money, in upskilling board members, directors to the level of digital literacy that you require, depending on the solutions you choose. And addressing low digital literacy, if you have those with low digital literacy on your board, is really around confidence. People are often scared of what they did not understand, and a willingness to learn. And I think those two things go hand in hand. Addressing them is quite a challenge. I'm not going to be able to go into the ins and outs of that, but it really requires investing time. If you do have board members who are more digitally literate, then getting them to engage with those who aren't, walking them through how to use it. Again, this comes back to testing things, testing the systems that each board member has. Test, check it again, get them comfortable with using it, run test meetings where it's not critical that they couldn't get on, but the next meeting, they can get on, and they get that comfort. And as they do more, they get more comfortable. So moving into technology, I love technology. I'm a bit of a nerd, probably quite high on the digital literacy scale, but I would suggest that keep technology to a minimum, at least initially. It's really easy to get overexcited about all the things that technology can do for you and your board. It's we can use the voting, and we can use this, and we can do that, whatever it might be. But the best approach is to step-by-step introduce technology. And so we might come on and we do our video meeting if we're using that technology, but we might not use the hand raising or anything yet, depending on what you use. And so just sort of do step-by-step, feature-by-feature, rather than just trying to go, boom, do everything at once. I think that's where, with that digital literacy piece, building people's confidence in use of technology is very important. Also additionally, going with that is less moving parts means less chance of failure. Choose a solution that best suits your board's needs, situation, budget, and digital literacy levels. There's no point having amazing tech no one can use or access. Decide well in advance the technology stack you're going to use. Ensure that you know it inside and out before you try run a meeting with it. Know its limitations, because there are some wonderful pieces of software out there. They are too expensive sometimes, or maybe they just have limitations you weren't aware of. You don't want to hit those limitations in the meeting. You want to know well in advance. There's a risk that we have undue expectations of technology, that somehow it's a replacement for more intimate connections, and it's magic and will do amazing things. So in terms of choosing tech, again, I've got in the chat at the top, I posted a link to, at the very, you might have to scroll if the chat's got long, but posted a link there to a document which we sort of curated for this, it has a whole bunch of things, including different software that you might use for video particularly, but equally so a whole lot of other resources around security. But I've listed some of the common ones that you might use there. Everybody knows things like Zoom and all that sort of stuff, being in the news a lot recently, not necessarily for good reasons either. But it's worth considering whether you sort of go, with phone, which is a well-tried and true technology. Most people, not everybody, but most people probably know how to join a conference call. It's fairly straightforward. Or you use video. I mean, in theory, you could even use something like a messaging app like Slack to run a meeting, although it probably pros some other challenges that I haven't thought about, but I just put that there as there are options. So in terms of phone, easy to use, familiar, less bandwidth, and no visual references, aids, or cues. The pros and cons. I'll also, that particular document link, I'll post at the very end as well, so it doesn't get too, apparently it's not scrolling back very well, according to my colleague Sheena. But video restores all the visual cues that we have. We can use visual aids, we can share screens, it's clearer communication if the bandwidth is running well. We can have eye contact as long as everybody looks at our camera up here, which is hard to do. Of course, you have to have higher bandwidth to do it. So it's superior if you can do it, but it's with so many people shifting en masse to remote comms, the corresponding increase in internet traffic might have a bearing on choosing video as your method if your boardrooms are in an area where it's not great yet. I have a really great little slide which I pinched from McKinsey, one of their wonderful articles, and it just shows the different channels there that you can use, calling, video conferencing, chat, voice captures, email. Again, I'll post a slide pack at the very end of the chat as well, just so that's for reference if you want to download this. But gives you sort of an idea of what's good for different sort of things, and some considerations there about whether you need to go structured, or you're doing one-to-one chats, one-to-many, like this is one-to-many, or many-to-many, which is probably more your board meeting. So yeah, interesting, great little slide there I picked up from McKinsey. What tools are needed for a board to go remote? There are literally hundreds of tools. So yeah, you can go video, audio tools. So you need something to be able to actually run your meeting. You need something around document sharing. Again, there's a whole lot of ones for document sharing. Dropbox. I mean, even Zoom and things like that have built-in file sharing. Probably not a great idea to use some of those built-in ones in some of the video platforms, as you probably want something that's more permanent. Alcata, who helped us make this session free, they offer document sharing. You want a solution, potentially a digital solution for minute taking, in something for between meeting discussions, digital brainstorming. If you do it going down the video route, then look for video options that offer a dial-in case directors' connections go down for some reason. Remember, no tool is perfect or error-free. Problems are going to happen. It's the nature of remote meetings and digital tools, as much as it would be wonderful with our magic, because the issues can occur at so many levels, whether it's the individual using the technology because they're not comfortable with it, or the computer or device has a problem, or the router that they're connected to that connects them to the internet has a problem, or there's an issue with the ISP connected to, or connection between the ISP and your computer and the service you're trying to utilize, issues with the server itself, the service itself. There's so many places things can go wrong with technology that we need to be really cognizant and expect it. Yeah, so a quick note on Zoom, there are a lot of privacy and security issues out there with it, which have existed for a long time and have really come to light recently. So if you are thinking about Zoom, again, in the document, which I'll post a link to at the end, which is at the very top of the chat, but clearly getting lost, then that will have it's got a few links to things to read up a bit about that, and you can make up your own mind about whether some of those tools are suitable for you. We'll also cover off in this presentation a little bit about that. Running the meeting. So we get to the day of the meeting, we're all organised, we've prepped up the wazoo. The chair and secretary should log in 15 minutes ahead of time. You want to start on time and you want to end on time. Don't let your virtual meetings just roll on and on and on and on. Energy and concentration will wane the longer it goes. So unlike face-to-face meetings, people are going to get sick of staring at a screen, almost to fatigue. There's a reason even webinars like this often don't go much more than an hour. It's just hard to concentrate that long on people talking, even if it's more than one. The chair should keep the meeting moving professionally. So you're going to have some issues, prepare for those. In remote meetings, less is more. Spend more time on less items if you can. Division of roles. So the roles of the board in terms of the chair who's facilitating the meeting, the timekeeper, minute taken, action capture, tech help. It's really easy, even in our regular meetings, I come across plenty of boards who do this all the time. There's the chair's also trying to take minutes, which is something we shouldn't be doing anyway, but they often do that and they're trying to chair the meeting. Make sure your roles in remote meetings are super, super granular as possible so that people aren't trying to focus on 50 things at once, because otherwise it's just going to be worse than your regular meetings. As I said, I think this is a really good process for thinking of going to remote meetings, thinking about how can we make our meetings better. This is one of the big things where it's really obviously better to really granularize, if you can, people what sort of role they play in the meeting. Tips for chairing remote meetings. So the role of the chair is even more critical and more challenging in remote meetings. Remember, the core role of the chair does not change in remote meetings. The chair still must facilitate. They must enable multiple perspectives to be heard. They must engender trust in the board. They need to model behaviour and support board effectiveness. But For remote meetings, you may need to chair the meeting more formally than you might usually. So, you need to be arriving early. You need to create a running sheet in advance. Don't just rely on only the agenda. Notate it well so that you have a pre-prepared reference for directing the flow of the meeting. I mean, you're almost playing air traffic controller, directing the conversation in the meeting, so we get less of that, accidentally talking over the top of each other. Start at the stated start time. Again, a really good practice for any meeting. Don't wait for latecomers. This sets the correct tone for you as the board meeting, as the chair doing this. Welcome each director as they join the meeting. This is particularly important for conference calls, but equally on video. If you've got a large video one on a small screen, sometimes things get lost. People's getting bumped down the list or whatever it might be. So it depends on what you're using and how your meetings sort of set up software is, but important to sort of greet people so they know. As the meeting progresses, check in with each person. Invite contributions by addressing directors by name and asking for their contribution on an agenda item or topic. So solicit that feedback from each regularly. Expect delays. I probably didn't cover this before, but especially if you're using video, you might have a 3 to 5 second delay, maybe even longer. And it is your job as chair to model the right behaviours in the meeting. Be courteous, sort of model how you expect the board members to behave and treat each other in the meeting. Regularly check in to make sure everyone's, not just that we're doing that, Jane, what do you think about X, blah, but also that everyone's paying attention and can hear what is going on. Someone might have dropped off and not realised that they couldn't hear or whatever. So think about the dynamics of your normal board meetings and give consideration to how these might play out in a remote meeting. Make a game plan for difficult dynamics. How can you use this change to remote meetings to improve behaviour and dynamics? Limit speaking time for participants, just so we can keep the meeting short and on point. If there are agenda items with interdependencies, complexities influenced by board dynamics like factions or something like that, get everyone's input well before the meeting. You can then, as the chair, summarise the various opinions and perspectives to best represent the views and options available, cuts down meeting time, and allows the meeting to keep moving instead of opening up for debate and discussion, which, while valuable, may derail a digital or remote meeting. Again, very complex items or big items may need their own meeting. It's as simple as that, just because we can't let our digital ones run too long. An idea is to start the meeting is to allow 1 minute per person and time it, so they don't go beyond that minute. For personal professional check-in, to allow board members time to connect. As the chair, you should go first, set the tone and candor level, remind everyone to respect each other but not interrupting, and only say what they're comfortable sharing. Having that sort of professional, personal check-in just allows people to sort of connect on a more, personal level as human beings. Take the meeting temperature, so stop and pause, go through each person, get input. What are they feeling throughout the meeting? Don't just go through a set list each time. Do it a bit more randomly. People show up late. Don't waste time recapping what they missed. If all agenda items are not addressed before the end of the meeting, consider scheduling another meeting. Again, this comes back to less items, more in more regular meetings. I know that's more work, but with everybody home, there should be time. Consider this as an option as well. If you do have ones where a meeting where you're experiencing significant delays, but you just want to push on with the meeting, consider taking silence as assent or a yes. So people only need to speak up if there is a disagreement on an issue. It would take practice, but even it just then means that you're sort of cutting out that that accidental speaking over or jamming up of the meeting. And if you're taking a vote, for example, have everyone respond potentially in chat rather than speaking if we're having connection issues. Again, I mentioned playing air traffic controller, direct the flow of conversation. Okay, I'm just going to get some points of view on this last item, Jane. We'll start with you, and then I'll go to Jennifer. Jane, what do you have to say? That type of structure and formal structure means that we're getting through a bit more, and you are directing the meeting rather than and the flow rather than just letting it higgledy-piggledy. Oh, I've got something, and then we get collisions. Security-wise, and this is not only the chair that needs to pay attention, be aware of who's in the virtual space that you're using. I mean, ideally using one that's password protected, and keep an eye on anyone joining who should not be there. In relation to board papers and reports, we'll touch on this a bit more, but preparing them, you may need to follow up to get people to give you supplemental information or restructure it. And in times when face-to-face is difficult or near impossible, we must ensure that chairs must ensure that they increase the regularity with which they speak with fellow directors and the CEO, and this means sort of more between meeting discussions, and that sort of plays again into these smaller, shorter meetings We're not going to have time to cover everything, so we may need to do some more informal things in between, without, of course, impacting the formality of board meetings. Board papers, reports, and presentations, again, really important that they're clear, concise, well-structured. Well-written board papers and reports always support effective meetings and make it easier for directors to add value to decision-making. They need to be clear, concise. If your board reports and papers don't yet follow the specified standard format, look into setting one for your board. It makes the papers and reports easier for directors to navigate and easier to prepare in many respects once people get used to that format. Ensure they're sent in advance. Make sure everyone has a downloaded copy that they can view on their own system in case video lags or there's some other tech issue. If reports are going to be sent by, should be sent before the meeting, so then only spend time on it if there are questions that could not be clarified before, or people want to provide a specific comment that's actionable that everyone needs to hear. What are we up to? So directors must also be active in ensuring papers provide sufficient information on which to base decisions. In remote meetings, it's really important due to the fact there may be limited time to seek clarification. And it's critical to assume that and behave as if everyone attending has read the report. Basically not doing so is an ethical violation. You're stealing time from other directors and the person who prepared the report. It's that simple. And when directors get that through their head, I think it's really good because it really gets them thinking about, oh, I'm not stealing money or something, but you are stealing their time and disrespecting people by not taking the time to pre-read. So having that behaving as if they've read it means that it reinforces that behavior. If you still have presentations or reports where you want them actually the person to present them, consider pre-recording these if it's in video or audio, and it means the person will hit the time limit, and that can even be reviewed prior to the meeting if appropriate for length and content. Just make sure they're hitting the right points that the board really needs to know about. Minute taking. In remote meetings, a harder role to fulfill. It's, as all meetings, it's a critically important function, but it's potentially more challenging to capture accurate and compliant minutes if you've got issues with lag and things like that. So the chair and the director need to be cognizant of the task of the minute taker and, where appropriate, clarify discussions and reiterate points and reasons for decisions so that they can be accurately captured in the minutes. Remember, so directors should increase their vigilance and attention in review and evaluation minutes that are circulated post-meeting. And remember, even with remote meetings, the minutes must confirm that all the legal and constitutional requirements have been correctly fulfilled. I propose as well the idea of casual board catch-up sessions. They're not meetings, but rather a remote get-together for the board that's more looser format, maybe less decision-making, reduction of formality, so there's a space for general discussion and potentially think about how you might incorporate that. Also, in these times when a lot of people have got a bit of social isolation happening, you know, good to just catch up and chat with our fellow board members because we can't go out and have a barbecue. Post-meeting, get feedback and do extensive follow-up. Ensure the actions are assigned and check in on progress before the next meeting. Follow-up. Extensive follow-up will help make sure the next meeting is better. Add a formal meeting evaluation and feedback process. You know, basically have the same 3 questions. Here's some examples that you have each time where they rate the effectiveness of the agenda and the chair and the meeting, how well prepared was everybody. Have all the board members completed anonymously at the end of the meeting or post the meeting, then collate the results across time to spot changes or trends. This is something that we saw add a lot of value just to regular meetings, and I think can be applied to remotes too, to really tighten up and figure out how to get better board meetings happening. On to security and privacy. So security and privacy, big thing with remote meetings. Security is a balance between the convenience of something and security. The most secure system would be if I take the computer I'm presenting on, remove all the communications, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, bury it under the ground in a secure concrete bunker and lock the door. Well, now I can't access it, neither can anyone else, so basically it's unusable. Equally, the most open system is easier to use, and a really good example of this is Zoom public links. We can get our public link, share it with everybody, but then anybody who has that link can get in. So we have to find a balance, and the balance with that convenience and security, but also balanced with the sensitivity of data and information that's being shared, which is particularly important for board meetings. And it's worth noting that this balance, as approved by Zoom, is even a hard one for large technology companies with thousands of employees. So while there are things you can do to increase security and you need to be cognizant of it and think about it, nothing is 100% secure all the time. An interesting side note, which I didn't really think about this until I was doing a little bit of research on some of the issues Zoom have been having, was one reason video providers like Zoom deprioritize security or make it a more optional feature, which is what Zoom has done. And it's not that they don't have security, it's that they have sort of made it optional and opt in rather than opt out of the secure features, is they're trying to preserve the quality of the stream. Solutions that don't encrypt by default are often concerned about performance, particularly on older devices with less raw computing power. And so adding additional encryption noticeably reduces the quality of video stream for some video conferencing providers. So just, interesting side note came across. I thought it's worth sharing. It's something to think about and gives context to security in the space of meetings and technology. Some general tips: don't record your meetings. There are a bunch of reasons for this, which you shouldn't be doing it anyway with your normal board meetings, but equally, you shouldn't be doing it with digital meetings or remote meetings, because some providers, you need to check terms and conditions, I've got a bit on this in a minute, but might claim ownership of recordings. Equally, the data might be stored in jurisdictions or somewhere you don't want it to end up. Plus, there's then also the other legal ramifications of recording board meetings, which if you have a bit of a look up about recording board meetings, I'm sure you'll find on the internet or on the Better Boards website. So use a solution that requires login rather than public links, so you can restrict who can join. Don't share meeting links publicly, for example, on Twitter, or even on a company system, internal company systems that are generally accessible to all staff. And use a solution that allows you to boot people from the meeting if there's a problem. Quick security essentials, just not specific to video, but just I think worthwhile considering as we're saying moving to this more digital world. Make sure you've got antivirus endpoint protection on every device. It's so cheap. There's read heaps of reviews online and to find one that suits you and your organization. But for example, one that I like is called Sophos. You can protect 10 devices for like $60 a year. It's a must-have. If that's too much for individual board members, because you can do 10 devices for $60 a year, and other providers also do this too. So no specific reason to use them or necessarily, but it's a cheap one for an organization too. So consider providing it to the devices the board members are using to access board materials. Two-factor authentication is really important on all systems everywhere you can, especially on email. As I said, email is kind of like a postcard and that people can read as it bounces across the internet, but equally as well, some of the security of it is only as secure as the server on which it's stored, and also access to your device and things. So I'd be really strongly advise you use an email provider that offers two-factor authentication, because it's also, think about how much information, personal or professional, you have inside your email that you wouldn't want someone else to get hold of. For sharing files, if you don't have a board portal solution, there's a really great solution that's released by Firefox. It's called Firefox Send. It's probably the best option out there now for free. If you're sending sensitive files, instead of using email, send it through that. It offers encryption, password protection, expiration. You sign up for a free account, you get those things, and I think can send up up to a gigabyte of files or something in one hit. It's completely free, and the Mozilla Foundation that offers it is one of the most privacy-focused providers or organizations on the planet. Password manager is also a critical tool, so we can have unique secure passwords for every online service we use. There's hundreds of them. Again, the Dashlane LastPass, just Google them. Some are either very cheap, like a few dollars a month or a year, or even free in some cases for personal use. And then make sure you've got the latest security and software updates installed on your systems. They regularly issue patches and updates to increase security. If you don't update, you miss out on these. Video conferencing security for organizations at an organizational level, specifically for video and web conferencing tech. You need to check the security protections offered by the provider, their terms of service, how that aligns with your policy to organization's policies, what info they collect on you and what they do with it, where the company is located, the jurisdiction it's in, but additionally where its service and data is located. That may influence you, particularly if your organization has requirements about data storage and where that data ends up. So you've got government contracts, things like that. What They might be, if they're in like another country, they may be subject to law, legal sort of covert data collection request and access, and they might claim ownership of the recordings, conversations, and data you share via their service. Again, don't record your meetings, not a great plan. From an individual perspective, do not share meeting links publicly. Use a private room, like the physical space you're in to be for the meeting. Be aware of who can hear. Don't share more than you need to. So that could be the screen that you're sharing, share only a window. If you're got a background, maybe set up, like use something to have a flat background or set something up to block the surrounds or whatever it might be. And also just be aware of like how much people can see in the camera frame. Maybe if you don't have something blocking what's behind you, people can wander past, but equally they might see something in your home you don't, or office you don't want them to. Board policies. So if you don't already have something that covers remote meetings, meeting technology policies and procedures, I think now is a great time to put it in place. Do it before you have a remote meeting. But a bit like a bring your own device policy, a remote meeting or meeting technology policy enables you to set clear boundaries and expectations for directors. Boards often consider sensitive information, and so you want to be specific about things like what video conference technology we're going to use, how they connect, where they should be located, if they're using VPN, a virtual private network to connect. But things to include, some loose guidelines are users, directors not allowed to record calls and meetings. Whether they can or can't use their own devices to connect, if they need to use organization issued ones. Whether they should be in a private room so that the sensitive information isn't discussed in a public place or open office space or in their home generally, so everybody can hear. The camera is focused on the user's face. Any visible confidential data should be removed from camera view. Cameras and mics turned off when not in use. So you might have all sorts of things in there. Guidance for how, particularly when not using video, directors should verify the identity of the people in the meeting. I'm sure you can come up with a whole bunch more. Going remote. So really we're coming to the end of the presentation here. And I think really to recap, extensive prep work is required. You need to increase that pre and post meeting communication. We need to do less in more meetings, and choose a technology solution that suits your board's needs. And so there's a lot of questions. I'm going to check both from sort of the number of votes, the highest votes, and go through, and hopefully there's not too many, and I will try and get through as many as I can. I'll keep going past this end time to answer questions if there's really great ones in there, which I haven't got to looking yet, so I expect that they are there. So yeah, it suits your board's needs from a digital literacy, but also just a cost perspective, things like that. Test, 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 and test again. New ways of doing are going, and other changes going to be required for you, your staff, your board members, if you're going to go totally remote meetings. So, we need to be aware of that and communicate that to others who are involved in that process, so that we can really be inclusive and make sure that we do sort of bring everybody on that journey to move to remote meetings. And then again, as we've sort of been through, be security conscious. Meetings are sort of a formal mechanism for decision making, and so maybe the depth of discussion has to be shifted elsewhere into other tools. The point of board meetings is to allow the board to engage in strategic discussion and decision making. So you need to consider and think about how do we structure our remote meetings to allow this to occur without causing issues or problems. So I'll leave you really with that for the end of the meeting. That's really the end of the presentation. Again, check out our cat herder if you are looking for a board portal. They have a lot of these different things as well. They have all sorts of different options for discussion. They have ways to vote in circular resolutions, and you can check those out there and grab a 45-day free trial with them if you're in the market for a board portal. So also, if you haven't already signed up, the Better Boards newsletter is free monthly governance and leadership articles. So betterboards.net/newsletter that we release each month on everything from remote meetings and notifications of webinars and upcoming events and all sorts. So really great resource. But even just the Better Boards website, if you don't want the newsletter, you can browse that and find hundreds of articles too on all sorts of governance and leadership, specifically for not-for-profits. If you need further help or guidance for your remote meetings, happy for you to reach out via email, info@betterboards.net. It's probably the best email for just general inquiries for all that. We're here to help, so please reach out. Oops. And now we're jumping into questions. So I'm just going to open up this questions tab. Let's see, I'm going to order it by upvotes. So how does your board manage voting? Hands not affected, not always seen, electronic hand. I assume that is really around people sort of wanting to get a feel for how other people on the webinar maybe do that. So the chat's a great place to put that. But the voting is, I would say that you want to have electronic hand, or you want a solution with chat so that people are seen, and you need to make sure it's all captured accurately. We can't, or you need to have a sort of process in place. If it's a conference call, you need to say we're going to vote, and we need to go through the chain. Needs to be Jerry, Jane, Jim, whomever. Let us know. You're one. So, and also equally, you can use things like our cat has got a circular motion and resolution decision maker functionality, so tools like that as well. But again, yeah, some software also has hands up ones as well. But I think Zoom, it is not to necessarily recommend that because of some of the security issues they've recently experienced. But although you can make it secure, so by all means, just check it out and make the decision for yourself. But I think that they have sort of a electronic hands up feature as well in the live video. And in voice, so I think it's really around putting structure in place for that. Is there a guide for structuring board papers or data to work better with a webinar remote format? I haven't come across a guide. I mean, generally, I think it's really about cutting down and saying, okay, what's necessary, and it's going to depend on the organisation, depend on the board. It's going to depend on what's really critical. But I think if you've got thinking about, well, are there things that could be pushed out? Are there things that could be pre-recorded as part of the pre-reading for presentations, so that we sort of cut down the amount of time we're spending on that, and we can get really down to the nitty-gritty of making a decision. But I'll have a think about it too, and maybe we might see if we can do some research on releasing something that's a better answer than that, because I haven't thought in depth about it. But I do think that you need to pay attention to restructuring and rethinking how they work, just because that remote format it does provide challenges for boards. Next one is, how safe is Zoom? Well, a bit like I mentioned, it's sort of a balance, and it depends on your needs and requirements. I did just before the webinar see an article, I think, in the ABC, where Zoom was responding to a lot of their recent criticism, saying, no, we are secure, which of course, as a company, that's what you want them to be doing if you're an investor of theirs or something. But equally, it really depends on your requirements. Again, I'll have to dig out the link to the different conference tool comparisons. But let's see, here it is. I'm just going to post that now. Over the chat. So I've just posted that in the chat now, the link to that, and it has a whole bunch of links to articles on Zoom. So you can sort of make up your own mind, because it's really kind of swings and roundabouts, and depends on your organization. Let's see, next one. Where are we up to? Which platform would be better for an AGM? I haven't actually found anything really super suitable for an AGM, particularly if you have one where it's like an association, you've got hundreds of members. But we will keep on looking into that, because I think it's definitely something that a lot of organizations will need. There are ones you could jury rig and use to do it, but once your membership goes past a certain sort of level, it's going to be a challenge. There was a crypto-based one for a while, but unfortunately they went out of business. So yes, I have to, not actually sure what specific solutions are best for an AGM yet at this time, fortunately. How do I recommend a circular resolution be implemented if not recommending email? There are plenty of chat tools. There is Slack. In that link I posted, there is one called Mattermost, which is an open source version of Slack. there's iMessage, there's Zoom, Zoom-like things that have chat in them. I do think that doing it via email, presents challenges. Our cat herder also has a solution within it for doing that. But email, it's become embedded in our lives, but it was created at a time when the internet was still sort of young and nobody worried about encryption and all these other things, and so it's pretty insecure, particularly if you're discussing very sensitive matters. But like, even as I said, I think in the previously, iMessage or other messaging apps like Signal and things like that are even more secure than your email, because they are built from the ground up with encryption. Let's see here. How do you manage anonymous? All right. How do you manage anonymous feedback from a small board of 7 on a remote platform that clearly identifies everyone? It may be that you have to take it off that piece off the platform into another space, just because a lot of these tools are really built around identifying people. But I believe as well, in my discussions with the team at our cat herder, that there is a tool coming for meeting feedback, which will be anonymized, which will be interesting when that's released, but I don't have a timeline on that, unfortunately. But otherwise as well, you may need to look at other solutions that have a little more public. I mean, even like Google Docs, right? You can set up a doc that anybody on the internet can edit if they have access to the link. You could potentially use that. I'm not advocating non-password protected things, but for complete anonymity, you may require solutions like that. Not ideal from a security point of view, but if you really need something to be anonymous, then you can use Google Docs. People can type out their feedback anonymously. You can't tell who it is who's typing. It just gives a pretend avatar to each person. So really great tip there. Schedule meeting 15 minutes earlier to allow everyone to connect. This person did their first virtual meeting last week with non-savvy IT peeps, and totally agree with prep them, practice beforehand, and paid off. So thank you for your comment. Yes, 100% test, prep, practice. What kind of platform would we would suggest for boards to use? Well, definitely a board portal solution for all the pieces that sit around the meeting. And then in terms of video, we haven't found one that's perfect, because it really depends on your organization's needs and requirements. But again, you need to sort of review all their documentation. There's no straightforward, this is the best one for boards only, because it depends on your jurisdiction and things like that. But board portals, whether it's cat herder or competitors to that, are really worthwhile to begin with. Let's see. So we've got a few. Is there? Someone asked, is the reason WebEx is not on a list of video conference providers? Just there's so many, like they're coming out, they're just everywhere. We can't list them all, but yes, you could use WebEx as well. I'm not super familiar with it. That's primarily the reason. There's one here on along with managing voting. How do you see who votes? We'll have voting delegates and then just observers. We don't want to allow the observers to vote. I'm not sure on the specific context, but if you've got platforms where you can identify the person, so it's not anonymized, then I don't think that would be an issue, because you would know who the observers are. Maybe that's specific to AGMs. I'm not sure. There's not enough context in the question. Can you please send a link for more discussion on why not record your meeting? I will see if I can dig something out, but the general practice in Australia, I'm not sure about other jurisdictions, is do not record your meeting. It's just a bad practice. That's what the point of the minutes are, and verbatim discussions are not really very good to have in a court of law, is my understanding of why not. But I'll see if I can dig out a link and post it into this room, which you'll be able to access afterwards still. Some general comments. There's another one, GoViva of some kind, or GovEva of some kind. So yeah, there's all sorts of solutions out there. Thank you for taking the time, if you're still with us, for attending. If you do have questions, reach out. As I said, the info at Better Boards, if you need help and support with your meetings, is probably the better one. But if you need to reach out to me directly, my email is raphael@betterboards.net. Thank you for being with us today. And if you have any, I will also post some more things in the chat there as well, so that there's reference material and the presentation slides. Thank you very much.